Pre-prologue. Risa stands beneath an unfamiliar sky as it begins to overlap. Not cracking like glass but bleeding through itself. Stars appear where clouds should be. A second horizon presses against the first, colors misaligned, distances wrong. The air trembles as magic surges in waves she does not recognize, ancient, distorted, and deeply unnatural. The world feels thinner here. Risa doesn't know what force has set this in motion, only that it is not meant to happen. Two universes are pressing against each other, their boundaries failing, their laws colliding. And somehow, she knows this is only the beginning. She will live to see what comes after the fusion. And the consequences will reshape everything. Prologue. 7 years ago, before the world began to feel unstable, I was exploring my kingdom alone. I did this often, despite being the elven princess. I believed that walking my forests and villages without ceremony let me understand my people in ways a throne never could. I thought freedom made me wiser. I was wrong. Far from the palace, in a quiet stretch of land where even the wind seemed hesitant, I was ambushed. They moved with cruel efficiency, their intentions clear the moment I saw their eyes. I fought. I screamed. I ran. It wasn't enough. They overwhelmed me quickly, dragging me away as panic set in and hope began to thin. For a moment, only a moment, I truly believed I would disappear there, erased without anyone ever knowing how or why. Then chaos erupted. A group of warriors burst into the clearing, fighting with speed and precision that felt almost reckless yet perfectly synchronized. They moved like a single will split into 4 bodies, striking without hesitation, trusting one another completely. My captors never stood a chance. They called themselves the Beasties. Piufo. Biribug. Tori Orian. Carry a crocodile. 4 girls. No banners. No oaths spoken aloud. And strength unlike any knights I had ever known. When they realized who I was, they didn't kneel. They didn't retreat. They looked at me not as a symbol, not as a crown, but as a person. They chose to stay. Not in service to my title, but to me. That day, I didn't just survive a kidnapping. I found my knights. And without realizing it, I stepped onto a path that would one day lead far beyond my kingdom, toward fractured skies, unstable worlds, and a future where the boundaries between realities would begin to fail. I didn't know it then. But that moment was where everything truly began. Chapter 1: Knights Without a Mold. The ceremony was unnecessary. That was my first thought as I stood beneath the high spires of the elven capital, sunlight filtering through crystal banners and living vines. Everyone had gathered: nobles in layered silks, guards in polished armor, citizens filling the plazas and balconies. Music drifted through the air, measured and elegant, rehearsed down to the breath. And yet, the 4 girls standing beside me looked like they'd wandered into the wrong story. Piufo leaned slightly out of line, arms crossed, scanning the crowd with open curiosity. Biribug whispered something under her breath that made Tori Orian stifle a laugh. Carry a crocodile stood tall but relaxed, her posture more battlefield than ballroom, eyes alert even now. They were the Beasties. They had saved my life. They had stood at my side ever since. Titles or not, that truth had already been written. The herald's voice echoed across the plaza, recounting deeds everyone here already knew: the ambush, the rescue, the battles that followed. Formal words wrapped around something raw and real, trying to make it fit tradition. I watched the faces in the crowd as the names were spoken: admiration, disbelief, curiosity, and in some cases, quiet discomfort. They didn't look like elven knights. They were too loud. Too casual. Too unpredictable. But their loyalty had never wavered. When the moment came, I stepped forward and spoke their names myself. Not as princess. Not as symbol. As the one they had chosen to protect. By royal decree, they were granted titles, authority, and resources befitting knights of the realm. They were given insignia forged for them alone, marks that bound them not to the council, not to the throne, but to me. That distinction mattered more than anyone in attendance realized. I saw it in the way certain nobles stiffened. In the way council members exchanged careful glances. Power that did not flow through expected channels always unsettled those who relied on control. The beasties accepted their honors with varying levels of seriousness. Pipiufo offered a short nod. Biribug grinned like she was holding back a joke. Tori Orian met my eyes with quiet certainty. Crocodile bowed once, clean and precise, then relaxed again, like the moment was already over. Watching them, I understood something clearly. This ceremony wasn't about reward. It was acknowledgement. An admission by the kingdom that what already existed could no longer be ignored. That the bond between us formed in blood, trust, and choice was now part of the realm's reality. As the crowd applauded and the music swelled, I felt it again. That faint tension beneath the air. The same unease I'd begun to notice more often in recent months. The world felt restless. Like a held breath. My knights laughed quietly among themselves, already bored of tradition, already looking outward instead of inward. And standing there with them, I knew this moment was not an ending. It was a beginning. Not just for us but for whatever the unstable world was slowly, silently preparing to become. Chapter 2 When the War Found Us. The war did not announce itself. There was no declaration carried by messengers, no formal challenge delivered to the gates of the elven capital. It began the way disasters always seem to, suddenly, violently, and without regard for the lives it would shatter. Human forces crossed into our territory at dawn. By the time the alarms rang, the forests were already burning. I remember standing on the city walls, watching smoke rise through trees that had stood longer than most human kingdoms. Reports came in faster than they could be processed: outposts lost, defenses breached, entire roads overrun. Old tensions, buried under treaties and uneasy peace, had finally broken into open conflict. And there was no stopping it. The beasties moved immediately. There was no hesitation, no need for orders. Pipiufo was already barking commands, Biribug checking angles and escape routes, Tori Orian silent and focused, Crocodile rolling her shoulders as if preparing for a storm. They positioned themselves around me without discussion, a living shield between the war and the one they had sworn to protect. The first clash was overwhelming. Human soldiers pressed forward with brutal efficiency: numbers, preparation, siege tools brought specifically to counter elven defenses. They fought like an army that had planned this for years. Our lines buckled under the pressure. Towers fell. Wards shattered. Ground was lost. Again and again. We were forced back through our own land, fighting on terrain that should have favored us, but preparation beat familiarity. The beasties fought constantly, never leaving my side, striking where the line thinned, covering retreats, dragging wounded soldiers out of collapsing positions. They were incredible. And it still wasn't enough. One by one, I saw them pushed past their limits. Pipiufo fought with a ferocity that bordered on reckless, blood streaking her armor as she refused to slow. Biribug took a blow that should have ended her and still got back up, laughing breathlessly through pain. Tori Orian's movements grew sharper, more desperate, every strike calculated to buy seconds we couldn't afford to lose. They were wounded. Exhausted. But they did not fall. Not once did any of them look back and question why they were still fighting. Their loyalty to me, to this kingdom that had become their home, never wavered, even as the situation turned dire. The humans surged again. Our final defensive line began to crumble. For the first time since the fighting began, I felt it: true fear. Not for myself alone, but for everything behind us. The capital. The people. The forests. The future. And then Crocodile stepped forward. She moved past the others, standing between the enemy and what remained of our forces. Her breathing was heavy. Her armor cracked. For a heartbeat, I thought she was simply too stubborn to retreat. Then something broke. Not shattered, opened. Power surged out from her in a way I had never felt before, raw and overwhelming. The air bent around her. The ground trembled. Light caught on her form as her presence expanded, strength and ferocity amplifying beyond anything we had seen. Super crocodile form. I didn't know the name then. I only knew the effect. The battlefield changed in an instant. Confidence drained from the human ranks, replaced by fear as Karyo struck with unstoppable force. Each step she took sent shockwaves through the ground. Each blow shattered formations that moments before had been advancing without hesitation. The humans faltered. Then they broke. For the first time since the war began, hope cut through the chaos, not fragile, not imagined, but real. Our forces rallied behind her. The beasties regrouped, drawing strength from what they were witnessing. We held the line. Not because we were stronger, but because something new had been born on that battlefield. As the fighting slowed and the humans fell back, I looked at the 4 girls who stood beside me, bloodied, exhausted, unbroken, and understood something with absolute clarity. This war was no longer just about territory. The beasties were no longer just my knights. They had crossed into legend. And the world, human, elven, and beyond, had just begun to learn their names. Chapter 3: The War That Learned. The war did not retreat with the humans. It adapted. After the battlefield fell silent and the wounded were carried home, a fragile belief spread through the capital that Karyo's awakening had changed everything. That the enemy would hesitate now. That fear would slow them. It didn't. Scouts returned with reports that unsettled even the most hardened commanders. Human forces were reorganizing faster than expected. Supply lines shifted. Tactics changed. They stopped pressing blindly and began testing our borders instead. Small strikes, probing attacks, feints meant to draw us out and measure our responses. They were learning. And so were we. The beasties became the spine of our defense. Not just as warriors, but as a presence appearing where morale wavered, striking where lines threatened to collapse, vanishing before the enemy could trap them. They didn't fight like traditional knights. They fought like something fluid, unpredictable, impossible to pin down. PIUFO turned chaos into momentum, leading countercharges that shattered enemy formations before they could settle. Biribug learned to read the battlefield like a puzzle, finding gaps no one else noticed. Tori Orianne became quieter, deadlier, her strikes fewer, but decisive. And Karyo Crocodile. Karyo was different now. Super crocodile form did not return easily. Whatever had awakened inside her came with strain. I could see it in the way she breathed after battle, the way she sat apart from the others when she thought no one was watching. Power had answered her need, but it had taken something in return. What that cost would be, none of us yet understood. The war stretched on. Villages were evacuated. Forest paths that had been walked for centuries were abandoned. The land itself felt tense, like it was bracing for something worse than steel and fire. At night, I stood on the palace balconies and watched the stars, uneasy in a way I couldn't explain. They looked wrong. Not broken. Not shifting. Just unfamiliar. There were moments, rare, fleeting, when magic behaved strangely. Spells took longer to form. Wards resonated where they shouldn't. Once, during a council meeting, every torch flickered at the same time, as if responding to something none of us could sense directly. The war wasn't the only thing moving. Politically, the pressure mounted. Some nobles demanded total retaliation. Others whispered of negotiation, of concessions to buy time. Human envoys sent messages heavy with justification and accusation, each one carefully crafted to sound reasonable while their armies continued to advance. I listened. I said little. Because watching the beasties fight taught me something vital: this war was not being driven by emotion alone. Something was shaping it. Steering it. Testing limits. And wars shaped by unseen hands never ended cleanly. One evening, after a particularly brutal skirmish near the Western Pass, the beasties gathered with me in the strategy chamber. No armor. No ceremony. Just exhaustion and honesty. "They're not afraid anymore," Biribug said quietly. "They are," PIUFO replied. "Just not of the same things." Tori Orian looked at me. "This isn't about land." Cario said nothing, but her clenched fist told me she understood. I did too. This war was becoming a crucible. Not just for kingdoms but for something deeper. Power. Identity. The rules that governed who could exist safely in this world. As I dismissed them for the night, I felt it again, that sense from years ago beneath a fractured sky. Pressure. Not between armies, but between realities. The war would continue. That much was certain. But I no longer believed it was the true beginning. It was only the first crack. Chapter 4: The Light Between Battles. War has a rhythm. At first, it is loud clashing steel, shouted orders, the roar of fire and magic. But as it drags on, the sound changes. It becomes quieter between strikes, heavier in the pauses. The waiting grows worse than the fighting. The humans did not relent. They pressed our borders from multiple fronts now, no longer favoring direct assaults. Supply lines were targeted. Messengers vanished. Small units slipped through forest paths that had once been considered sacred and untouchable. The land itself felt strained, as if it resented being turned into a battlefield. The beasties were everywhere. If a line began to buckle, they were there. If a village evacuation stalled, they cleared the path. If panic spread faster than orders, they cut through it with presence alone. They fought hard, slept little, and laughed even less than before, but they did not break. Neither did we. And yet, something else had begun to appear. The first time I saw it, I thought exhaustion had finally reached me. We were returning from a skirmish near the eastern ridge, smoke still rising behind us, when the forest ahead shimmered faintly. Between the trees, just for a breath, I saw a green light. Not the glow of magic as I knew it. Not a spell. Not a ward. It hovered. Steady. Silent. Then it was gone. I said nothing at first. War teaches you to doubt your senses. But days later, PIUFO stopped mid-stride during a march and swore under her breath. Did anyone else see that? Biribug did. Tori Orian nodded once. Even Cario, weary and bruised, stared at the space where the light had been. Always green. Always brief. Never threatening. But never natural. The war worsened. Human commanders adapted again, countering our movements faster than before. Their magic grew sharper, their coordination tighter, as if someone were feeding them knowledge they hadn't earned yet. Battles became more costly. Victories came with scars instead of cheers. Super crocodile form appeared twice more. Each time, it saved lives. Each time, it left Cario shaking afterward, her breathing ragged, her eyes distant. Power answered her call, but it did not come freely. I began to fear what would happen if she were forced to draw on it too often. And always between battles, during retreats, on nights when the stars felt wrong, the green light appeared. Once, I saw it reflected in a pool of water where no spell had been cast. Another time, it glowed faintly along the edge of a ruined watchtower, like a scar in the air itself. Soldiers whispered about it. Some prayed. Others feared it. I watched. I listened. I felt something stir beneath the unease, an intuition I didn't yet have words for. This war was not just being fought across land. It was being observed. During one long night in the command chamber, maps spread before us, the beasties sat in silence while rain battered the windows. No one joked. No one argued. We were all too tired for pretending. That light isn't human, Biribug said finally. And it isn't elven, Tori Orian added. Pipiufo leaned back, arms crossed. Whatever it is, it's not on their side either. Cario looked at me then. You've seen it the longest. I nodded. Yes. Does it feel like an enemy? She asked. I hesitated. No, I said. It feels like a witness. The word settled heavily in the room. The next morning, the war surged again, another push, another brutal clash at the southern pass. We held. Barely. As the humans finally withdrew, leaving the ground torn and bloodied, I stood amid the aftermath and saw the green light one last time that day. This time, it didn't vanish immediately. It pulsed once. As if acknowledging something. As if marking the moment. I didn't know what it meant yet. I only knew this: the war was continuing, growing more dangerous by the day, but the appearance of that light told me something far more unsettling. We were no longer alone in this conflict. And whatever watched from beyond the battles was waiting. Chapter 5: When the world gave way. The war did not end. It ground on. Day after day, battle followed battle, each one bleeding into the next until victories lost their meaning. We were winning, but only just. Every gain came at the cost of exhaustion, of wounded soldiers who could barely stand, of commanders forced to choose which ground could be held and which had to be abandoned. The beasties never left my side. They fought without pause, rotating through the front lines like living anchors, holding the line whenever it threatened to give way. Pipiufo's voice grew hoarse from shouting orders. Biribug moved with practiced efficiency, masking fatigue behind sharp humor that fooled no one. Tori Orian's focus never wavered, even as blood stained her armor. Cario Crocodile carried the weight of battles no one else could, her strength unmatched, her silence heavier with every fight. Human forces began to falter. Their advances slowed. Their formations broke more easily. Retreats replaced confidence. For the first time since the war began, I felt the faintest sense that this nightmare might end. Then the world betrayed us. It began with a tremor. Not the rolling shake of an earthquake, but a violent lurch, like the land itself had lost its footing. The ground convulsed beneath us, throwing soldiers to their knees. Magic surged wildly, spells misfired, wards shattered, energy flaring without command. The air warped. I felt it in my chest first, a pressure that made breathing difficult, as if the sky were pushing downward while the ground strained upward. The shaking intensified, not random, not natural, like two massive forces pulling toward one another, trying to occupy the same space. Reality was tearing. The sky distorted, colors misaligned, horizons bending where they should not. The land groaned, stone splitting in unnatural patterns. Cracks opened not just in the earth, but in the air itself, thin, shimmering fractures that pulsed with unstable light. And then they appeared. An army emerged where there had been nothing moments before. Not marching in. Not summoned. Not arriving through any gate or spell I recognized. They simply were, standing amid the chaos as if the world had made room for them by force. Their armor was unfamiliar, their presence heavy in a way that made even hardened soldiers recoil. Power clung to them, not wild, not chaotic, but controlled and unmistakably foreign. This was not an elven force. It was not human. And it did not belong to this war. I stared, heart pounding, trying to understand what I was seeing. Around me, fighting slowed not from command, but from shock. Even the humans hesitated, uncertainty rippling through their ranks. In that moment, I did not know who they were. I did not know where they had come from. I only knew one terrible truth. This conflict was no longer about borders, or kingdoms, or old hatred between elves and humans. The war had grown beyond us, beyond this world. Much later, I would learn the truth. That this army came from another story entirely. That they appeared just after a man named Nathan awakened a power known as the Green Light. That this moment marked the point where two universes truly began to overlap. But standing there, beneath a sky that no longer obeyed its own laws, all I understood was this. The war had become something far greater than any of us had prepared for. And the merging of worlds had begun. Not quietly. Not gently. But by force.